The forbidden law. The war was over. The battle had been lost. Ethan Carter, a human soldier, lay on the cold metal floor of the alien warship, his hands tied behind his back. His uniform was torn, his body bruised. Around him, strange alien warriors stood tall, their dark eyes filled with hatred. They were Zeltharians, the rulers of this part of the galaxy, and humanity's greatest enemies. He had been captured, and now he was their prisoner. Ethan lifted his head as two guards pulled him to his feet. The doors in front of him slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air smelled of metal and incense. The Grand Tribunal of the Zeltharian Empire stood before him, a massive hall, filled with rows of alien leaders watching him with disgust. At the center of it all, a throne of black stone. On that throne sat the supreme ruler, his eyes cold and emotionless. His golden robes shimmered under the dim lights. Next to him stood his daughter, Princess Tyra. She had violet skin and piercing silver eyes. She wore a flowing white dress, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Ethan's heart pounded. He had heard stories about her, the untouchable princess, the one no male could claim unless she chose him. The supreme ruler rose from his throne, his voice deep and commanding. "Human, you stand before the tribunal of the Zeltharian Empire. You are a prisoner of war. You have no rights, no future, no life." The aliens around him growled in approval. Ethan clenched his jaw, but said nothing. The supreme ruler continued, "But there is a law, one that even I cannot break." A hush fell over the room. No unmated female of the royal bloodline may remain without a mate. She must choose or face execution. Ethan frowned. He didn't understand. What did that have to do with him? Then realization struck him like a hammer. Princess Zyra was unmated, and by their law, she had to choose a mate or die. The room erupted into whispers. The supreme ruler turned to his daughter. "Zyra, the choice is yours. Choose your mate or accept your punishment." Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clenched at her sides. She was trapped. She had no good options. If she chose one of her own kind, she would be bound to him forever. If she refused to choose, she would be executed. Her silver eyes flickered to Ethan for a second. Then, without hesitation, she stepped forward. "I choose him." The room fell silent. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What?" Gasps and shouts echoed through the hall. The supreme ruler's face darkened. "You dare insult your people." Zyra's voice was calm but firm. "The law is clear, Father. No other male has me. Now I belong to him." The supreme ruler's hands clenched into fists. His gaze burned with fury, but he could not deny the law. Ethan barely had time to react before two guards grabbed his arms and forced him to his knees. Another voice cut through the chaos, a deep, menacing growl. "This is unacceptable." From the crowd stepped a massive Zeltharian warrior, his dark armor gleaming. General Krax. Ethan knew his type. A brute. A killer. The kind of soldier who saw violence as a solution to everything. "She is mine." Krax roared, glaring at Zyra. "You promised me your hand. Now you insult me by choosing a human. A weakling." Zyra did not flinch. "I never agreed to be yours, Krax. And you cannot break the law." Krax bared his sharp teeth. "Then I challenge him." The tribunal murmured in approval. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had no idea what this meant, but it didn't sound good. The supreme ruler's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Very well. The human will fight for his claim. If he wins, he may keep you. If he loses, he dies." Ethan's blood ran cold. A fight. Against Krax. A trained alien warrior. A monster. He had no weapons, no armor, and no way to refuse. Zyra's voice was urgent, almost pleading. "Ethan, listen to me." The guards dragged him away before she could finish. As the doors slammed shut behind him, one thought echoed in Ethan's mind. He had been a prisoner. Now he was a challenger. And tomorrow he would fight or die. A warrior's claim. Ethan Carter sat in the cold darkness of his prison cell, his back against the rough stone wall. The air was damp, filled with the scent of metal and burning incense. The only light came from the energy barriers sealing his cage. His muscles ached from the beating he had taken when the guards threw him inside, but his mind was racing too fast to care about the pain. A fight against General Krax. To the death. The Supreme Ruler had made the terms clear. If Ethan won, he could keep Zyra. If he lost, well, the result didn't need to be spelled out. The problem was obvious. Krax was built for war. He was nearly 8 feet tall, a wall of muscle and fury. Ethan, on the other hand, was just a human soldier. Strong, yes. Trained, yes. But nothing compared to the brute strength of a Zeltharian warrior. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. He needed a plan. A soft beeping sound made him snap his eyes open. The energy barrier flickered, and a figure slipped through. Ethan tensed, ready for a fight. It was Kyra. She moved quickly, kneeling beside him. Up close, her silver eyes burned with urgency. "You don't have time," she whispered. "Krax will kill you the moment you step into the arena." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I figured that part out." Her hand tightened on his wrist. "You don't understand. Krax isn't just any warrior. He was bred for battle, trained from birth to kill. He will not give you an honorable fight. He will crush you." Ethan met her gaze. "Then why did you choose me?" She hesitated, then looked away. "Because you are my only chance." His jaw clenched. Chance for what? She hesitated for only a moment before answering. Freedom. Ethan stared at her, waiting for her to explain. Zyra's voice was low, urgent. "My father has been planning a war far greater than any humanity has seen. But I know something he does not. A secret that could destroy the Empire. If I had chosen Krax, I would be bound to him forever, forced to be his mate. I would never have the chance to escape, never have the chance to act." Her fingers tightened on his arm. "But if you win, if you survive, then I can escape with you." Ethan exhaled slowly. So this wasn't just about tradition. It was about power, control, war, and now he was in the middle of it. "So, what's your plan?" he asked. Zyra pulled a small object from the folds of her cloak and placed it in his palm. It was a thin metallic strip no longer than his finger. "This is an energy disruptor," she explained. "Krax will be wearing battle armor that enhances his strength. This will disable it for a few seconds. It's not much, but it's enough." Ethan studied the device, a small advantage. But an advantage was all he needed. "What about weapons?" he asked. Zyra shook her head. "You won't get one. The fight will be barehanded." Ethan sighed. "Of course." He looked at her, studying the worry in her expression. "Why are you helping me?" Zyra met his gaze, her silver eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "Because I chose you," she said simply. Before he could respond, the doors hissed open, and 2 guards stepped inside. "It's time." Ethan took one last deep breath, shoving the disruptor inside his sleeve. Then he stood. No turning back now. The arena. The crowd roared as Ethan stepped into the circle of combat. The arena was massive, carved from ancient stone, surrounded by thousands of Zeltharians. Their voices rose in a savage chant, hungry for blood. On the opposite side, Krax entered. He was a beast of a warrior, his dark armor gleaming under the lights. His arms were thick as tree trunks, his fanged grin filled with cruelty. The battle scars on his chest told a clear story. He had never lost. Ethan rolled his shoulders, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to win with strength. He had to be smart. The Supreme Ruler stood from his throne. "Begin." Krax moved first, faster than Ethan expected. The alien warrior lunged, swinging a brutal fist. Ethan barely dodged. Feeling the wind rush past his face, he backed away, watching Krax's movements. The brute was strong but predictable. Krax swung again. This time, Ethan let the punch graze his side before twisting around and landing a sharp elbow to the warrior's ribs. Krax barely flinched. Instead, he grabbed Ethan by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Pain exploded through Ethan's body as he struggled against the iron grip. The crowd roared in excitement. Zyra's voice cut through the noise. Now, ETAN. Ethan's hand snapped up. His fingers found the disruptor hidden in his sleeve. He pressed it against Krax's armor and activated it. A sharp burst of blue light exploded from the device. Krax staggered. His enhanced strength flickered for a second. Ethan seized his chance. Using every ounce of strength, he twisted his body, breaking free from the loosened grip. As he fell, he slammed his fist into Krax's unprotected throat. The alien warrior choked, stumbling back. Ethan didn't stop. He couldn't. He struck again, a punch to the ribs, a sharp kick to the knee. Krax dropped to one knee, his body shaking as his armor failed to reactivate. The crowd gasped. Krax roared in fury, lunging again. Ethan ducked under his swing, planting his foot into the warrior's chest with all his might. Krax hit the ground. The arena fell into complete silence. Ethan stood over him, breathing hard. The Supreme Ruler's voice was cold, furious. It is decided. He clenched his fists. He wanted to kill Ethan, but he couldn't break the law. Ethan had won. And now, Princess Zyra belonged to him. The battle for freedom. Ethan Carter stood in the center of the Zeltharian arena, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. The air was thick with silence, a stunned hush falling over the thousands of onlookers. A moment ago, they had been roaring for his blood. Now, they didn't know what to think. At his feet, the massive form of General Krax lay still, his deep black armor flickering as it struggled to reboot. The once mighty warrior, one of the Zeltharian Empire's strongest champions, had been defeated by a human. Ethan's knuckles still burned from the final blow, but he remained still, his muscles tense. He didn't trust these aliens, especially not the Supreme Ruler sitting high above on his throne. The ruler's expression was stone cold, his golden eyes locked onto Ethan like a predator deciding whether to strike. Then the ruler spoke. "The trial is over. The law has been followed." The words were simple, but the hatred behind them was clear. Ethan had won, but that didn't mean he was safe. Two guards approached, their sharp weapons raised. For a second, Ethan thought they were going to execute him anyway. But instead, they bowed their heads, not to him, but to Zyra. She stepped forward, her silver eyes unreadable. The soft glow of her ceremonial robe shimmered under the arena lights. She looked at Ethan, then at her father. "He is my chosen." Her voice was calm but firm. "No one may touch him." The Supreme Ruler's jaw tightened. For a moment, Ethan could see the war raging in his mind. He wanted nothing more than to rip Ethan apart right there in front of the entire empire. But the law was the law. If he killed Ethan now, he would be seen as weak, a coward. Ethan wasn't sure whether Zyra had planned for this, but it was working. "Very well," the ruler said, his voice like ice. "Take them both to the royal chambers. The binding ceremony will take place at first light." Ethan's stomach twisted. Binding ceremony. He turned to Zyra, but she didn't look at him. What the hell had he just gotten himself into? The captive and the princess. Ethan was taken to a lavish room high in the palace, far from the cold, damp cells he had been thrown into before. The walls were lined with shimmering metal, the floors covered in strange, soft fabric. A large balcony overlooked the city of Vazelkar, its towering spires glowing under the twin moons. The door behind him slid open. Zyra entered, her robe replaced with a more form-fitting battle suit. Her silver hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. She closed the door and turned to face him. Ethan crossed his arms. "You want to explain what the hell a binding ceremony is?" She let out a slow breath. "It's complicated." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Try me." Zaira walked to the window, looking out over the city. The Zeltharian Empire believes in absolute loyalty. When a mate is chosen through a trial of combat, a bond must be sealed through a ritual. She turned back to him. "A physical one." Ethan's muscles tensed. "You mean like a marriage?" She gave a small nod. "In a way, yes. But more than that." Ethan rubbed his temple. "This keeps getting better." I drifted closer. "I know you don't trust me, but you have to listen." Her voice was softer now, almost urgent. "If we don't escape tonight, you won't get another chance. Once the bond is sealed, they will never let you leave." Ethan frowned. "Then why did you choose me?" She held his gaze. "Because you were the only one strong enough to win, and the only one reckless enough to fight." He let out a dry chuckle. "Great. Glad I fit the job description." Zaira's expression didn't change. "I can get us out, but we have to leave before dawn." Ethan's heart pounded. He had known this wasn't over. But now, things were moving fast. Escape, tonight, or stay and be bound forever. The escape plan. Zaira moved quickly, pulling a small hidden device from beneath her sleeve. It flickered to life in her palm, a holographic map of the palace. "There's a ship in the lower docking bay," she whispered. "It's fast enough to get us past the security perimeter. If we can reach it before the guards change shifts, we have a chance." Ethan studied the map. "And if we don't?" Her silver eyes darkened. "Then we die." Ethan nodded. "Simple enough." Zaira pulled out 2 small, curved blades from her suit, handing one to him. He took it without hesitation. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. They waited, listened. The palace was never silent, but they could hear the guard rotations shifting. It was now or never. They slipped into the hall. Ethan followed Zaira, his steps careful but quick. The corridors were filled with strange, glowing symbols, their light flickering as they passed. Every now and then, a guard would appear, and they would hide in the shadows, holding their breath. Then, just as they rounded a corner, an alarm blared. Zaira cursed under her breath. "They know." Ethan didn't wait for an explanation. He grabbed her hand and ran. Footsteps pounded behind them. The air filled with shouts as guards stormed the hallways, their weapons glowing. Ethan and Zaira darted through an open doorway, slamming it shut behind them. The docking bay. A sleek black warship sat waiting. Their way out. Guards swarmed in from every entrance. Too many. Zaira turned to him, her voice sharp. "Get to the ship. I'll hold them off." Ethan shook his head. "Not happening." She narrowed her eyes. "You don't get to argue." Neither did she. Because at that moment, the Supreme Ruler's voice thundered over the intercom. "You cannot escape, daughter. And neither can your human." The doors slammed shut. The docking bay was sealed. Zaira's face went pale. Ethan tightened his grip on his blade. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was war. Escape from the Empire. The docking bay was a battlefield waiting to ignite. Ethan Carter stood beside Zaira, both of them breathing hard as the Supreme Ruler's voice echoed through the high-ceilinged chamber. The massive bay doors were sealed tight, red warning lights flashing across the walls. A squad of heavily armed Zeltharian elite guards surrounded them, weapons raised. Their escaped ship was only 20 meters away, so close, yet impossibly far. "You cannot escape, daughter." The Supreme Ruler's voice boomed over the intercom. "You disgrace your bloodline. You think a human can save you." Zaira clenched her fists. "I was never yours to control, Father." Ethan's grip tightened around the curved Zeltharian blade in his hand. He wasn't a fool. He knew the odds were against them. The guards were stronger, faster, and better equipped. And the second they moved, they would unleash hell. They needed a distraction. Ideas? He whispered to Xyra, eyes scanning the room for anything they could use. She gave a quick nod towards the ceiling. Ethan followed her gaze. Above them, a massive fuel storage unit loomed, held up by thick support beams. A plan clicked into place in Ethan's mind. The fuel lines, he said. We cut them. Flood the bay. One spark, and... Xyra's eyes widened. An explosion. It was reckless. Dangerous. But it was their only chance. Ethan smirked. How much do you trust me? Xyra let out a slow breath. Less than I should. Good enough. The first move. The guards charged first. Ethan barely had time to react before a massive Zeltharian warrior lunged at him, a long energy blade swinging down. He sidestepped just in time, the weapon slamming into the floor with a crackle of red lightning. Before the guard could pull back, Ethan drove his blade into the alien's exposed side. The warrior let out a guttural cry, stumbling backward. Xyra was already moving, her own blade slicing through the air. She was fast, faster than Ethan expected. Her movements precise and deadly. Within seconds, 2 guards had fallen, their armor sparking. But there were more. Too many. Ethan ducked under another swing, rolling towards the nearest fuel conduit. He grabbed the hilt of his blade and slashed it across the thick pipeline. A high-pressure burst of liquid shot into the air. Xyra saw what he was doing and followed his lead, cutting another pipe on the opposite side of the room. Within seconds, the docking bay was flooded with the highly flammable Zeltharian fuel. The guards hesitated, realization dawning in their eyes. One spark. That's all it would take. Ethan grinned. Now would be a good time to surrender. The guards didn't move. The Supreme Ruler's voice cut through the speakers. Kill them now. I don't care if the bay is destroyed. End this. That was all Ethan needed to hear. Lighting the fire. Ethan reached into his belt and pulled out a small energy dagger, a weapon he had stolen from one of the fallen guards. The blade hummed to life, a bright white glow emanating from its edge. He tossed it into the fuel. The reaction was instantaneous. A violent blue fire ignited, consuming the floor in a split second. The flames raced toward the guards, forcing them to scatter. The heat was intense, almost unbearable. Ethan grabbed Sarah's hand and ran. The 2 of them darted through the chaos, dodging panicked guards as explosions rocked the docking bay. A nearby fuel tank ruptured, sending a shockwave of fire and debris through the room. They reached the ship. Sarah slammed her hand against the side panel, and the ramp hissed open. Ethan leaped inside first, rushing to the cockpit. Xyra followed, her fingers dancing over the controls as the ship's engines roared to life. Behind them, the docking bay was collapsing. Through the viewport, Ethan could see the Supreme Ruler's personal warships moving into position, ready to intercept them. Xyra gritted her teeth. They'll never let us go. Ethan cracked his knuckles. Then we'll make them. The chase begins. The ship blasted out of the bay, tearing through the sky at breakneck speed. Sirens blared across the city as pursuit crafts launched, streaking towards them like metal birds of prey. Ethan took control of the weapons system. How many are back there? Xyra's hands flew over the controls. Too many. Laser fire rained around them, red beams cutting through the dark sky. Ethan fired back, the ship's plasma cannons lighting up the night. One enemy fighter spiraled out of control, exploding in a fiery burst. But the rest kept coming. Xyra swerved left, barely dodging a missile. The ship shuddered as another blast hit their rear thrusters. Shields are failing. Xyra shouted. Ethan clenched his jaw. Then we better move faster. Ahead of them, the planet's upper atmosphere glowed like a deep blue curtain. If they could just reach space, they could jump to hyperspeed and escape. But the Zeltharians weren't letting them go that easily. A massive war cruiser appeared above them, its cannons locking on. Zyra's hands shook as she read the scans. "That's my father's flagship." Ethan exhaled. Of course it was. A voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "The Supreme Ruler. There is no escape. You will surrender." Ethan looked at Zyra. "Tell me this thing has a trick up its sleeve." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. "There is. One." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why do I feel like I'm not going to like it?" She turned to him, her silver eyes burning with determination. "Because if we do this, we may not survive." Ethan grinned. "Sounds like a normal day for me." She didn't smile back. Instead, her fingers danced over the control panel, inputting a sequence. The ship suddenly lurched downward, diving straight toward the planet. Ethan's stomach dropped. "I take it back. I don't like this plan." The Supreme Ruler's voice roared through the speakers. "What are you doing?" Zyra gripped the controls. "Escaping." And then, the ship vanished into the atmosphere, engulfed in flames as it plummeted toward the surface. Secrets of the Princess. The warship plummeted through the atmosphere like a burning comet. Flames roared across the hull as Ethan Carter gritted his teeth, gripping the sides of his seat. The force of the descent pressed him back, making it nearly impossible to move. "Sarah, this is insane," he shouted over the deafening noise. Zyra sat beside him, her silver eyes locked on the controls. "Trust me," she shouted back, her hands moving at blinding speed. The Supreme Ruler's warship had been seconds away from destroying them. Instead of running, Zyra had turned their ship straight into the atmosphere, forcing a high-speed planetary dive. Ethan didn't know much about Zeltharian flight technology, but he did know one thing. This wasn't how you were supposed to land. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit. The ship's AI voice droned a monotone alert. "Structural integrity failing. Hull temperature critical. Impact imminent." Ethan fought against the crushing force to glare at Zyra. "Tell me you have a way to stop us from becoming a crater." Zyra's fingers flew across the control panel. "Almost there. Almost there. Now." She slammed her hand onto a glowing switch. With a gut-wrenching jolt, the ship's emergency anti-gravity thrusters kicked in. The fiery descent slowed instantly, shifting from a deadly fall to a rapid but controlled glide. The warship sliced through the thick jungle canopy, tearing through trees before finally crashing into the soft, dense ground below. Silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Smoke curled from the control panels. Sparks flickered in the dim cockpit. Ethan let out a breath, then turned his head toward Zyra. "You are insane." Zyra, still catching her breath, smirked. "But we're alive." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "Barely." Outside, the jungle buzzed with unfamiliar sounds. Alien creatures rustled in the thick foliage, their glowing eyes watching from the shadows. The sky above still crackled with distant energy, signs of the Supreme Ruler's warships patrolling for survivors. Ethan unstrapped himself. "We need to move before they find us." Zyra nodded, reaching under the control panel and pulling out a small holographic cube. She stared at it for a moment, her expression unreadable. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" She hesitated. Then she met his gaze. "The reason I ran. The Empire's darkest secret." They moved quickly through the jungle, sticking to the shadows as the sound of distant warships rumbled above. The jungle was dense, humid, alive with unseen dangers. Ethan kept a firm grip on his blade, knowing they weren't the only predators out here. Zyra led the way, moving with the precision of someone who had been trained to survive in any environment. After nearly an hour of navigating through the thick undergrowth, they reached a clearing. A massive ancient stone ruin stood before them, covered in alien glyphs. The structure looked abandoned, vines and moss crawling up its walls. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and something older, something hidden. Zyra finally stopped, turning to face Ethan. She held up the holographic cube. With a quick flick of her wrist, the device activated, projecting a swirling map of the galaxy into the air. But something was wrong. At the center of the projection, near the core of the Zaltharian Empire, a dark red pulse flickered, a pulsing void that spread outward like a growing infection. Ethan frowned. "What am I looking at?" Zyra's voice was quiet. "The end of everything." She touched the projection, zooming in on the red pulse. Data streams flickered to life, revealing encrypted Zaltharian records. For centuries, the Supreme Ruler has been searching for something. A weapon. A force unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. She looked at Ethan. He found it, and he's going to use it against humanity. Ethan's stomach tightened. The war between humans and the Zaltharian Empire had been brutal, but it had never been complete annihilation. The Zaltharians were conquerors, not exterminators. But this was different. Zyra continued. The Empire discovered an ancient technology buried deep beneath one of our oldest cities, an energy source beyond anything we understand. The Supreme Ruler believes it was created by the first civilization, the oldest beings in the universe. But he doesn't want to study it. He wants to weaponize it. She zoomed in further. The data shifted, revealing classified reports. Project Devour. Ethan's blood ran cold as he read the text. A weapon designed to consume entire star systems. Not conquer. Not enslave. Erase. If he succeeds, Ira whispered, Earth won't just lose the war. It will cease to exist. Ethan's hands curled into fists. He had fought in dozens of battles, seen friends die. But this was a level of destruction beyond anything he had ever imagined. How long until he activates it? Zyra hesitated. Weeks. Maybe days. Ethan turned, pacing for a moment before stopping. He looked at her, his mind racing. You could have run. You could have escaped and never looked back. Why risk everything to stop him? Zyra's silver eyes met his. Because I refuse to let my people become monsters. And because... She hesitated, then took a slow breath. Because I believe in you, Ethan. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He wasn't a hero. He was a soldier, a survivor. And yet, for the first time in his life, he felt like something more. He nodded. Then we stop him. Zyra tightened her grip on the holographic cube. There's only one way to do that. She pointed to the map. A single location blinked in bright yellow. A hidden research facility deep within the Empire's core. We break in. We destroy the weapon. We end this war. Ethan smirked. Just the two of us. Zyra smirked back. Wouldn't be fun otherwise. Above them, the sky rumbled as enemy warships descended toward the jungle. The hunt had begun. War for humanity. The jungle was alive with danger. Ethan Carter and Sarah crouched beneath the thick canopy, their breathing steady but urgent. The air smelled of damp earth and alien vegetation, but it was tainted with something worse, the acrid scent of burning metal. Above them, Zaltharian warships hovered in the sky, their searchlights cutting through the trees like glowing knives. Drones zipped between the branches, scanning for any sign of movement. They were being hunted. Ethan clenched his knife. They're moving fast. Zyra's silver eyes flickered as she analyzed the enemy's patterns. They know we're still alive. My father won't stop until we're either captured or dead. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then we better keep moving. Their destination was clear. The hidden research facility, deep in the Zaltharian Empire's core. It was the heart of Project Devour, the planet-killer weapon that could erase Earth. And they had to stop it. But first, they had to survive. The pursuit begins. The first attack came swiftly. A squad of Zaltharian hunters dropped from the trees, their black armor gleaming in the dim light. They were silent, fast, and deadly. Trained assassins meant for only one thing: eliminating threats before they became problems. Ethan saw the first one a split second too late. A blade flashed toward him. He barely dodged, rolling to the side as the alien warrior lunged again. His attacker was twice his size, but Ethan was quicker. He ducked under the next strike and drove his blade deep into the hunter's exposed side. The alien gasped but didn't fall. Instead, it grabbed Ethan by the throat and lifted him into the air. Ethan choked, struggling against the crushing grip. His vision blurred. Then, a blur of silver. Ktira moved like lightning, slicing through the hunter's wrist with a precise slash. The alien howled, releasing Ethan, but before it could retaliate, Thyra finished it with a swift strike to the throat. The hunter collapsed. Ethan fell to the ground, coughing. That was too close. Thyra helped him up. There will be more. She was right. More shadows moved in the trees. The Zeltharian warships were circling, closing in on their position. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. We need an extraction. Thyra hesitated. I might have a way, but you won't like it. Ethan gave a dry chuckle. Story of my life. A risky plan. Thyra pulled a small beacon from her belt, a communication device, one that pulsed with a faint blue glow. Ethan frowned. What is that? Thyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned the device over in her hands, as if debating whether to use it. Then she looked at him. I can call in a rogue fleet, she finally said. A faction of my people who don't support my father. But there's a problem. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Just one. Thyra ignored the sarcasm. They don't trust humans, and they won't risk war unless I give them something in return. Ethan narrowed his eyes. And what do they want? Thyra hesitated. Then, softly, she said, Me. Ethan's stomach twisted. No. Thyra's expression remained calm. It's the only way. Ethan took a step closer. So what? You hand yourself over to another group that wants to control you. That's not freedom. Thyra. She met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her silver eyes. But it will save Earth. A long silence passed between them. The jungle buzzed with distant warships. The enemy was closing in. Finally, Ethan exhaled. Call them. Thyra activated the beacon. A deep humming sound filled the air as the signal was sent across the stars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a response. A voice crackled through the device. Princess Thyra, we expected this call. Ethan stiffened. They had been waiting. Thyra's voice was steady. I have what you need, but we move on my terms. We strike the research facility together. Help us destroy Project Devourer, and I will surrender myself to your command. A pause. Then, agreed. Ethan clenched his fists. This was happening. The war had just begun. The battle for the research facility. Hours later, the rogue fleet arrived. A dozen cloaked warships emerged from the depths of space, their hulls glimmering under the distant sun. They moved silently, like predators preparing for an ambush. Ethan and Thyra boarded the lead ship, a sleek black vessel known as the Valkyrus. The commander, a tall Zeltharian woman named Commander Virex, met them in the war room. Her gaze was sharp. Your human smells of war. Ethan smirked. That's just sweat. Virex ignored him. She turned to Thyra. Your father is preparing to activate Project Devourer. If we attack now, we can stop it. Thyra nodded. Then we don't wait. The final infiltration. The attack on the research facility was swift and brutal. Ethan led the ground assault, moving through the massive underground base with precision and force. He had fought in battles before, but this was something else. An all-out war for survival. The Zeltharian defenders were ruthless, but the rogue fleet fought with the strength of rebels who had everything to lose. Lasers cut through the air. Explosions rumbled beneath the ground. Ethan and Thyra fought side by side, tearing through the enemy defenses as they pushed toward the control center. Then, they reached it. The control room of Project Devourer. Inside, a massive energy core pulsed with unstable power. The entire facility hummed with its raw force, the air crackling with electricity. Ethan stared at the massive machine. How do we shut it down? Zyra's face was grim. We can't. Ethan's heart pounded. What do you mean we can't? Zyra looked at him, her eyes filled with something heavy. We have to destroy the entire facility. From the inside. Ethan exhaled sharply. Let me guess. That means blowing ourselves up with it. Zyra nodded. Unless we find another way. Ethan stared at the unstable energy core. The fate of Earth, the galaxy, everything. They had one chance. And no time to waste. The final stand. The control room of Project Devourer hummed with an ominous energy, the massive core at its center pulsing like a living heart. The walls around Ethan and Zyra glowed with ancient alien rooms, their eerie light flickering as if reacting to their presence. The facility beneath the Supreme Ruler's capital was not just a weapon. It was alive. Ethan clenched his fists. We destroy this. We destroy the Empire's greatest weapon. Zyra's silver eyes were locked on the core, analyzing every detail. We have minutes before my father realizes we've reached the control room. Commander Vyrex's voice crackled over the communicator. We've breached the upper levels, but reinforcements are coming. You need to shut it down. Now. Zyra shook her head. It won't be that simple. Ethan already knew that. Nothing had been simple since the day he set foot in the Zeltharian Empire. Then the alarms blared. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Warning! System activation in progress. Zyra's face went pale. No, he's activating it remotely. Ethan cursed. How long do we have? She pressed her fingers against a holoscreen, reading the calculations. 5 minutes, maybe less. Ethan scanned the room. He saw the power conduits, the data uplinks, and the reactor stabilizers. He had seen enough military bases to know how to blow one up. But this wasn't just a base. It was an ancient machine built by something far older than the Zeltharians. Devoure's hands were shaking as she worked. I can't override the activation. The core is too advanced. If it reaches full power, the energy surge will spread across the entire system, erasing Earth in minutes. Ethan tightened his grip on his blade. Then we shut it down the old-fashioned way. Zyra met his gaze. We overload it. A dangerous plan. A suicidal plan. But the only plan, the final battle. Before they could move, the doors exploded inward. The Supreme Ruler's elite guard stormed in, their weapons raised, their black armor gleaming in the dim light. At their center, the Supreme Ruler himself strode forward, his golden robes flowing behind him. His gaze burned with fury as he took in the scene before him. My daughter, my greatest disappointment. His voice was cold, emotionless. And the human who has corrupted you. Zyra stepped forward, standing between Ethan and her father. This ends today, father. The Empire's rule dies here. The Supreme Ruler shook his head. You were meant to be my legacy. Instead, you are nothing but a traitor. His energy blade ignited, humming with raw power. You will not leave this place alive. Then, chaos. The guards attacked first. Ethan moved on instinct, ducking under a swinging blade and slashing upward, his own weapon cutting through the enemy's armor. He twisted, using the momentum to drive his knee into another warrior's chest. Zyra was a whirlwind of motion. She moved with deadly precision, her twin daggers cutting through the air like silver lightning. Ethan's heart pounded. They were outnumbered. The Supreme Ruler was closing in. Then, a sharp pain in his side. Ethan stumbled back as one of the guards landed a brutal hit, his blade slicing into Ethan's ribs. Blood spilled onto the floor. Zyra turned just in time to see him fall. Her silver eyes flashed with fury. No. She lunged at the attacker, her daggers flashing. The guard didn't stand a chance. Ethan forced himself up, pressing a hand to his wound. "I'm fine." His voice was rough, strained. But they were running out of time. Destroying Project Devourer. Ethan fought through the pain, his mind laser-focused on the core. They had to detonate it before the weapon activated. He turned to Xira. "We need to overload the stabilizers. If we do that, the entire system will implode." Xira's fingers flew across the control panels. "I can set the core to self-destruct, but we won't have much time to escape." Ethan exhaled. "Then let's make sure we're not here when it goes off." The Supreme Ruler stepped forward. His energy blade hissed as he raised it toward them. "You will not leave this place." Xira clenched her jaw. "I wasn't asking for permission." The Supreme Ruler charged. Xira met him head-on. Their blades clashed, the air around them crackling with energy. The Supreme Ruler was stronger, but Xira was faster. She dodged, striking at his exposed ribs. He twisted, blocking at the last second. Ethan turned back to the core. Seconds left. He pulled a thermal charge from his belt and slapped it onto the main stabilizer. "Time's up," he shouted. Xira heard him. In one final move, she slammed her dagger into her father's shoulder. Twisting hard, the Supreme Ruler stumbled back, rage flashing across his face. But before he could strike again, the entire facility shook. The energy core flared wildly, its containment fields collapsing. Ethan grabbed Xira's wrist. "Run." They sprinted toward the exit, dodging falling debris as the walls cracked and fire erupted around them. Above, the Supreme Ruler's voice roared in fury. Then the explosion hit. A massive shockwave ripped through the facility, sending a surge of fire and energy in every direction. The last thing Ethan saw was the bright light of the explosion. Then, darkness. Aftermath. Ethan woke up to the sound of rain. He groaned, his body aching as he forced himself up. They had made it. The jungle stretched out around him, the ruins of the research facility smoldering in the distance. The Supreme Ruler's warships were gone. The Empire's greatest weapon was no more. Xira sat beside him, her expression unreadable. "You're awake." Ethan exhaled. Barely. She smiled. A real smile, for the first time. Commander Virex's voice crackled over the communicator. "The Supreme Ruler's forces are retreating. He's lost everything. The Empire will fracture." Ethan met Xira's gaze. "We won." She nodded. For now. There was still much to do. The Empire was weakened, but not gone. But for the first time, there was hope. Ethan smiled, resting his head back against the grass. "Next time, we do this without nearly dying." Xira chuckled. "No promises, human." As the rain fell softly around them, Ethan knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning.